Hey friends, welcome back to my channel, your go-to resource from a New York City creative director. In this video, I am talking about grids. I'll cover modular grids because it's a good way for you to get started using grids in general. You can definitely break the grid. Designers do it all the time, which effectively means that there aren't any rules, but you should still take the grid into consideration. Think of it as a tool that's flexible versus something that's a rigid template. So here is my guide to using a grid. Why wouldn't you want to work faster? So many times clients or internal stakeholders don't give us enough time to work on a project, so a grid will alleviate some of the stress in designing. Set up your grid, drop in your elements, and align it to the grid, and you're halfway there. Hopefully not living on a prayer. Grids make it easy for you to know where to align things. In terms of structure, grids help you create a design system. You can allocate certain sections of your grid for specific pieces of content. You're basically getting areas of your design organized, and then all you have to do is drop in your content. Some people think that Bootstrap is dead, but it's still used by millions of developers. And even if you're not using Bootstrap, websites are built based on a grid, so your design should follow that grid. Modular grids are easy because everything's the same. So here are 3 different modular grids. Each have equal amounts of space allocated. They don't necessarily have to be all squares, they just have to be equal. You can also combine more than one block within the grid. Your content will be the biggest factor when you're grouping things. Grids allow you to control scale between elements, and you can visually see that contrast. You should also be mindful of hierarchy and balance. Where modular grids make it so simple is when you have equal hierarchy because everything should be the same size. The easiest and most straightforward modular grid is a 2x2, or sometimes referred to as a quad, because you'll just run content in the 4 quadrants. You see this occasionally in magazines where you tear out the page and then you can tear that page into 4 smaller cards, which is what I'm going to do here. First, we have to adjust the grid. If we drop our dividing lines first, the original grid has uneven margins, so we want to even that out like this. My point in doing this is for you to understand that you should adjust your grid to fit the format of your content. We can now see that each block is perfectly centered in each quadrant, so all we have to do is drop in content. For this, I kept it simple and chose Starbucks drinks. Here are 4 of them. We just need to drop in labels, and this side is done. On the back of this, you would put a description or recipe of each. I just grabbed this from the Starbucks site, and that's it. This doesn't need to be complicated any further. So easy and so fast. I mentioned digital design earlier, so let's take a look at that. Your modular grid doesn't have to be the entire design. You can use it in specific sections. I'm going to drop in a 12-column grid. Mind you that this is a column grid only, which I will cover more on that in another video. Very quickly, we drop in a header, a hero section for the content site, and then use a modular grid for the content touts throughout the site. I think 2 across is going to be too big for desktops, so I'll switch that to 3, which allows you an additional breakpoint for tablet. Now we just replace these with our touts. If there was a lot of content on the site, you don't want to continue this throughout because it'll get pretty boring. You'll have to break up the cadence by adding a different module like this. Just so that you can see, the module still follows a column grid. The only thing that is modular are the content touts. These are super straightforward, so let's design something that's a little bit more involved. Here is a table of contents for a magazine, and I'll design it using a modular grid. I often like having an odd number of columns when I work with grids because it creates a forced white space, which we love because it's a design principle. Let's parse this text. Table of contents is a header, so it should be bigger. I'll anchor it to the left of the grid and center it within this top row. We can change the typeface. This section here doesn't align to the grid, but it doesn't have to. Again, a grid is a guide, not a template. We can separate this from the rest of the content by allocating the entire top row to it, so I'll remove the guides up there. Caveat that this is not possible to adjust the grid like this in design programs. I'm only showing it visually so you can understand my process. We have a label for food and drink, so I'll move that to the top. Let's zoom in here so you can see how I'm styling this. First, we turn our type. I also want to fix this plus sign. For those of you wondering, what did this plus sign do to me that I want to fix it? Well, when you're setting your type, you want to design all of the characters. You have to adjust things such as hyphens versus n dashes or m dashes. Plus signs are just a pet peeve of mine, so I like to give them a little bit more love. I think they look stubby when they're bold, so I style mine using the lighter font and then I make them bigger to closer match the words. I'll show you that comparison here. The original on the bottom is typed out and the other is typeset. I want to style this a little bit more by turning it into a slug. A slug in magazines is basically an eyebrow label on the page. I'll keep this simple and put it in a box. Since this and the headline are both shaped like boxes, we can add a polite amount of contrast by rounding one of the corners. We have some intro text which I'll allocate to the second row for now. We'll change the typeface. Okay, another tangent lesson on setting your type. This video is focused on grids, but while we're here, when we set our type, there's actually a maximum character count on the line length for readability. The character count on this top line is 105 characters. This is extremely hard to read for your consumer. The standard line length is 45 to 75 characters, but the general rule is to just not go above 75 characters. We could say there's some flexibility with the 75 characters, but really try not to push it. I like to keep my line lengths around 60 so that I'm nowhere near the max. So we need to adjust this. You can do that by increasing your font size until you reach a reasonable character count, or by reducing how many columns your text box takes up. We can actually continue this for each width available on the grid. These are their point sizes. If you notice, the last two are the same point size. The reason for this is that in both instances, neither is above 75 characters, so there's no need to go smaller in point size. I want the text across only 4 columns, and then I'll adjust the point size to be larger. Now we have the rest of our content. There are 8 page numbers, so we just need to allocate 8 sections for them. I'm gonna go with these. There are 2 modules for each, one for the number and the other for the description. By grouping them together, we're using the Gestalt principle of common region. Let's change the typeface. Now our text is too big for the column width, so we can go down in point size. And then I'll style the subheads like this. I want to lean into the numbers, giving them hierarchy over the description, so I'll make them quite big. I'll also align it to the bottom of the module so that it's anchored to the description, which is the Gestalt principle of proximity. Here are the rest of the numbers. This works fine, but we need to style the numbers so that there's some visual interest. If you didn't know, we actually read the tops of characters, so I'm going to style this by dropping the baselines of the numbers and cutting it off with a line. Here it is without the grid, so you can see that change. The page is balanced. If this needed to go out to someone in a rush, you can send it as it is. However, we can make more adjustments if we have time, which we do because I control the length of this video. I think the elements need to relate to each other a little bit more. We can move the description to align with the page numbers in this region here, which gives you the entire top area for our headline. So it can get bigger. Since we cut off the bottoms of the numbers, we can mimic that motif with our headline by cutting off the letters on the sides. This is still centered within that top region. We have to kern this. Let's add some color, and there we go. I only use type in this layout for the purposes of example because I really want to promote you guys learning how to design with type alone. You'll be a much stronger designer if you can do this because you'll always have letters, you won't always have image or illustration. At a magazine, the table of contents would actually have an image or two. That option could look like this, and everything is still sitting on the grid. If this was your project and this was your first option, you would already be familiar with the grid and the elements. So any additional elements would go much faster because all you have to do is move things around. So let's do another option. We have our slug and headline at the top. I can drop in a couple images on the left and then our intro on the right column. The only elements left to add are the page numbers and descriptions, and we have this area to fit them all. We need 8 regions, technically 16 since we will get 2 modules. We can create a modular grid into this area only to fit the needs of our content. I'll do 8 across, and then I'll split this into 2 columns. This is gonna get really tight, so I want to adjust the gutter in the middle to create more space between our columns. I wanna call out that the space is equivalent to double the size of the horizontal gutters. The measurements are somewhat arbitrary, but they should still relate to each other. Here are our 8 regions. We can now drop in our content. Let's look at this without the grid. I also want to add a thin separator in the middle so that we direct our reader to read the columns vertically instead of left to right. Last touch, there's no overlap in this layout. We can give some dimension by using a solo of the plate, and here are all the options. This was very much a long-winded way to explain using a modular grid. It's pretty straightforward, but I hope that sharing my thought process when designing helps you in your process. It does allow me to call out other design principles so you can start seeing that everything else I talk about on the channel start working together. So is this how you use a grid? Have you used a modular grid before? Comment below. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.